And it takes us to our action agenda tonight, and item number 17. I think we have one item under 3A that we need to address. Do I have a motion? Ms. Hutchison.
I move that we approve the selected employment items as shown in Exhibit A.
Do we have a second? Mr. Cates seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. That passes unanimously. Brings us to number 18, which is a recommendation to the superintendent regarding the maturity schedule for general obligation bonds. And Mr. Gallagher, I meant to come speak to you a little earlier. I know you're here along with Ms. Heiser. You've met with us numerous times, and I'd like to ask you if you would, we have the schedules provided for our meeting tonight, pretty much what you went over last time. I'd like for you to come to the podium and review that with us, and then after the conclusion of that, we will probably have some questions, but we'll have a motion and move forward. And I apologize if that is putting you on the spot, but I know this is what you do, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gant, Dr. Melton, ladies and gentlemen of the board. It's a pleasure to be here with you. At the last meeting, we went through the base of the building program for the school district, and then I gave a summary of the various target millages there would be based on the various payment options of 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, and 10 years. Had a couple questions that come back about what impact that would have on your 8% debt limit going forward when you would pay that back. So we'll go through this, and I'll try to keep it as brief as possible because we've already seen this information. It's just showing it in a little bit more detail. So under the 10-year payback, for $30 million, that would take us from 54.8 up to 60.8 mils. And you see that on the graph. This shows the payment of the $30 million there in column D, which would take you to approximately $31.2 million a year in total debt service. As far as looking at what this does with the millage, you would see the target on this page in column I is a 60.8 target, and we've solved it to come as close as possible to that target. You'd see that you would have additional capacity would be opening up in 2029. That's when, if you kept at a 60.8 target, you would have additional debt service capacity outside of your normal 8% annual bonds. You would have capacity opening in 2029. As far as the impact it would have on your debt limit, we would be issuing pretty much the amount that you have available beginning in 2020 after March 1st payments were made. You would have about $4.5 million of capacity opening up, 7.3 the following year, then just under 10 million in 2023. That information is included in column I. And that summarizes the 10-year payback. And we have the exact same information put together for 7, 5, and 3s. And so the graph for 7 years, we would go from 54.8 mils up to projected 63.4 mils. You see it on the graph. Showing in column D the payback from 2020 through 2026. Millage, we would have additional capacity opening up in 2027, which would fall in line with once the bonds were paid off. Constitutional debt limit, you would be recouping your debt limit capacity a little bit faster under this scenario, $5.7 million in 2020, 9.8 in 2022, and then almost 14 million in 2023. And that summarizes the 7-year payback. If you would go with a 5-year term, millage would go from 54.8 mils to 67.5 mils. Total payments for the district would be just over 34.3 to just under $35 million. You'll see this totaled in column G, but column D has the 5-year repayment of the bonds. as far as when you would have additional debt service capacity under a 67.5 mil target. That would come in 2025, and that would be to the tune of about an additional $7.5 million. You could decide what your needs would be at that point in time, or you could drop millage. It'd be a choice of the district. The 5-year payback is detailed in column D, and then you'll see that you would get $7 million in capacity back in 2020, $13 million in 21, and then just under $20 million 22, and then be fully paid back by 2024. And then if you were to go with the shortest term possible, obviously that's going to have the greater millage impact. That would take millage from 54.8 mils up to 75.4 mils, and that would have to be repaid over 3 years. That would have payments of just over $10.8 million, or right at that, pushing total payments up to $38.7 million per year, but it'd only be for 3 years. As you can see, you'd have additional capacity. It would be your decision at that point in time what to do when the bonds are paid off in 2022. As far as the debt limit goes, you would get $11.8 million of capacity back in 20. You'd be at $22 million in 2021, and then in 2022, once the bonds were paid off, you would have all of your capacity returning. So now that was a little quick and just trying to hit the high spots. I think some of this is information we've already covered before, but I want to make sure we went through all the options.
Okay. I'm going to entertain a couple of questions and probably going to entertain a motion. Mr. Cates.
Just to, again, understand, you say our debt capacity that comes back, and it varies based on the term.
Yes, sir.
In the first few years, it's pretty low, but that is in addition to the $10 million that we assign for capital.
Yes,
so
sir.
that $10 million,
the $10
is
million
available to us each year.
If we look under all those options you see on the graph, an area shaded in yellow, that is what's in the annual maintenance placeholder. We've got $9 million budgeted every year for you. So we kept that intact.
Thank you.
And Mr. Gallagher, I appreciate the information. Stay close by, but I was going to ask Mr. Richardson, the last sheet in here, the millage increase cost to taxpayers. Mr. Richardson, would you walk through this sheet on the different numbers of years here and kind of recap that? I just want to make sure everybody has this again. I know we've done it a couple of times.
Certainly, Mr. Gant. What I tried to do here was show you what the annual cost would be to the taxpayers based on each one of these 4 scenarios. And obviously I had to use an assessed value that was easily, I guess, multiplied. So what I did was I used a home at $100,000 assessed value, a car at a $20,000 assessed value, and any other type of business or personal property at $100,000 assessed value. And that way you can see for 3 years, for instance, the cost to a homeowner would be $82.40 per $100,000 of assessment. So obviously if your house is worth $200,000, you'd multiply that by 2, and so on. I did that for each one of the terms. And basically that's what you've got here. Did I adequately explain that?
You did, and obviously the shorter the term, the higher the impact, and then the longer the term, the impact spread out further. I think that's what you're trying to show in there.
Yes, sir.
Anything,
Yes,
Ms.
sir.
Hutchison?
I was just going
Question?
to make a motion.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, did you want to
Okay.
ask?
All right, Ms. Hutchison, I'll recognize you then for a motion, and we'll continue to discuss.
I move that the board recommend to the superintendent that the general obligation bonds be repaid in 5 years.
Have a second? One second. Mr. Cates, seconds. And we'll now have discussion. Ms. Hutchison, I'll come back to you since you made the motion.
Thank you. There's a couple of reasons why I'm recommending 5 years. Number one, I think to go out beyond 5 years to 7 and 10 years is really burdening future boards and the district as a whole. I figured out the per month amount based on the assessed value, and when you break it down to that amount, and providing that that our taxpayers, have budgeted for the cost of insurance and taxes, and even anticipated slight increases, just as, we have from other agencies. I think that the 5-year would probably be the easiest for taxpayers. The second point is that I looked at the interest, the difference in interest payments. And now, I'm doing this math like this, so I was trying to just do it by hand, so I can't swear to the exact, but the interest payments, let me see if I can figure out my notes. For 3 years, it looks like we would be paying $2,291,750. We go to 5 years, it jumps to $3,989,000, and then jumps to for 7 years, $5,736,000, and 10 years, it jumps really high to us paying over $8 million. So when I looked at that and realizing that interest is taxpayer money, I would much rather us save money, make a conservative by 5-year, a conservative recommendation for paying back the loan without obligating the district for too long of a period, but also saving money. The difference between, say, 10 years and 5 years, let's see, I'm not sure if I did that, but 10 years to 7 years is a savings of $2.3 million. So anyway, I think everyone kind of gets my gist, is that, as everyone knows, the longer you finance something, the more interest you're going to pay. So my recommendation is that we pay less interest, which is less taxpayer money, but then keeping in mind the impact on taxpayers, and thus making it the 5-year financing terms.
Thank you. Mr. Lovelace.
Well, it's two things about that I noticed from Mr. Gallagher's comments. One, first, that he's lowered the amount that the yellow in the chart that you showed. It used to be $10 million last year. Now it's $9 million for our maintenance budget that you put in the yellow.
What we've done before is we've sized that out each year to what's available under your millage target. And so 9's been the placeholder. What we do is each year we look at it. To the extent we have additional capacity, then we push it up to that capacity under the mill target.
Okay, so, but we looked at a static situation. My point has long been that $10 million or $9 million 5 years ago isn't the same as $9 million today. So we're underserving our maintenance budget. Okay, we're taking all of the money from our maintenance budget that we have available. We only have $31.5 million right now total, plus the $10 million that we spend every year. So we're talking about putting $30 million toward this new school. It leaves us $1.5 million that we have to go right now if we were to do that next year. Okay, so my point is that, that budget doesn't need to be static. It needs to be determined by capital budgeting asset model, and it needs to be done by the needs, not by just some arbitrary figure. The second thing is, if we're going to look at it that way, Ms. Hutchison just was so kind to lay out, but between 3-year period and a 5-year period, we're going to spend $1.7 million more in interest, it looks like.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, but if we just got it over quickly, then we could recapture our ability to maintain our schools more quickly, and those we have a lot of older schools. We have a lot of situations where safety may be an issue. We just had a report done that showed that. So I think that we should go with the faster payback period. It may be uncomfortable right now, but we'll have the money, and it'll save us money. In the long run, it'll save taxpayers money because it's saving $1.7 million in interest. And that's my contention.
Before we leave Mr. Lovelace's point, Mr. Richardson, will you help us with the capital money we spend each year? Because what I heard Mr. Lovelace say, if we were to go with this, we'd have $1 million next year. Is that what we'd have for capital budget for our existing schools to exist on?
Mr. Lovelace was referring to was the capacity we had left under our 8% debt limit. We have $1 million, and it left after our $10 million, $9 or $10 million capital budget and the $30 million for the school.
Okay, so technically there's the 10 million or the depreciated 10 that we talked about, still going to be used in the million that would be there.
Correct. Correct.
Mr. Lovelace, you good with that?
Yeah, I mean, this is Robert Gant's rules of order, but at what point may I amend a motion?
Actually, as a point of order, I don't know that Mr. Lovelace had the floor. I was going to ask you if you were making an amendment. That was the reason I was,
Okay.
that was up to you.
Point of order, I'd like to make an amendment. Okay.
So you can make that now if you like.
Okay, I'd like to amend the motion to change this to a 3-year payback period, and shown under Mr. Richardson's first column in the 3-year financing term.
Okay, do we have a second to Mr. Lovelace's
I'll
motion?
second it for, yeah. We got 2 seconds.
All right, I think
He
Ms.
did.
Hutchinson second.
She did it first.
Okay, so now that'll lead us back to discussion and then a vote. So, Mr. Lovelace, I'll come back to you since you made that amendment. That's amendment to our original motion.
Yes, sir.
Do you want to discuss it beyond that?
Well, I think I've pretty much laid out what I thought, and that it would save us $1.7 million in interest. We would recoup our ability to borrow funds for the maintenance of our schools faster, so that in maybe a year and a half, we might be able to have another situation answered that may come up. I don't know what that might be, and nobody does, but you know, I think it would be wise not to box ourselves in for 5 years. That's what I think.
Mr. White.
Couple questions. We did that facility study in case we go out for another referendum. I'm not sure who to ask this question to. But if we do a referendum, can we pay off the balance of this with referendum proceeds? Does anybody know the answer to that? You know, let's just say we went out to a referendum. I mean, obviously you can solve a lot of problems in a referendum, but
I saw her head shaking before she.
Good evening, y'all. This debt will probably be sold as non-callable, which means that you wouldn't be able to prepay the debt. That's what the marketplace would expect, I think, for a relatively short-term piece of debt like this. Then if you wanted to use debt to repay other debt, you might be able to do it as taxable debt, but I really doubt y'all want to get into that with your explaining that as part of a referendum. So there'd be some real hurdles in order to effectively prepay this debt.
Mr. Kent.
and is there a gap in the Mr. Richardson, this may be your question, but is there a gap in what we've historically used in our capital budget? I mean, we've done this before. We did it with Oak Point, and we did 8% money and built. But if we're spending roughly 10, I mean, how much of a gap are we going to have problems funding 10 going forward? I mean, obviously, if we had something of severe need, we could dip into fund balance for a one-time expense, you know, not the recurring expenses.
And we could, and I don't see this would impact our ability to do what we're doing now anyway.
I'd like to hear, I mean, I've always had 5 in my mind, but I'd like to hear just sort of poll the board members, see what y'all think about 3 versus 5. I mean, the impact to taxpayers and their tax bills is something to consider, and then the, obviously, the faster you pay it back, the less you pay in interest. But the fact that that's non-callable means you're pretty much committed to pay the full load of interest.
Ms. Hutchinson?
I would go with the 3-year. I think that in talking with Mr. Richardson earlier, in previous conversations, he felt comfortable with that. And as Mr. Lovelace mentioned, then it doesn't tie up our capital project money for as long, a time. So I'm comfortable with it. And once again, when you break it down by per month and everything and those same calculations, plus the fact that you would be saving, almost $1.7 million. I like saving money when you can, so I would be supportive of a 3-year financing term.
I'm going to go to Ms. Hammond. She had a question a minute ago, and then Ms. Hammond, kind of weigh in on where you are
Yeah,
on this,
well,
too.
that's what I thought I needed to do for the public and for the board. I did not vote to use the 8% money, the total amount, and always it was what concerned me was tying up the capacity for especially after we were presented the MBCon needs assessment. And I realized that was so much, I'm sure it would need a bond. But I think my vote is since I voted no to even do it, I think probably it is better, to me, you have the business sense, Mr. Lovelace, about paying back quicker, and I understand that. But I'm sort of protesting the whole process. I think that we need to be able to tell the public the total millage. There's not any millage increase with our regular operational budget that we're going to vote on. But with this is tying up a lot of money, and I don't feel like we, since I was against using the 8% money to build the school, I'd have rather gone to a bond and really sold the needs and looked at the whole district and all the district. So I'm really not, if I vote on either of this, I would probably be for saving more money. But I wanted to tell the whole board, I still feel like since I voted not to use all the 8% money, none of the plans would suit me.
Ms. Hammond, I think we got that part.
Yeah,
We're at a new
Right.
juncture today.
I
We
know.
can't go back in time.
I know, but you need to know where I'm.
I
what
know
I'm thinking.
exactly where you are on
Thank you.
this. If we could do it without spending a penny, we'd all do it.
That
would be where we'd be.
It's the process in
Right.
discussing it.
Mr. Lovelace?
I wanted to ask Ms. Heiser one thing. Right now, we don't have a guaranteed maximum contract with our construction manager at risk, okay? And
Mr.
Yes.
Lovelace, you're really outside the
Well, I
bounds
just
of what
wanna-
we're doing.
I just want to ask her, if
Well, go ahead
we
and ask
borrow
her, but
$30
you're
million,
outside what we're discussing.
if we borrow $30 million and we only need $24 million, can we spend the remainder on another project?
Actually, you could, at the direction of the board, if you actually borrowed 30 million, you ended up needing slightly less than that for this project, the board could redirect any unspent proceeds. But in terms of timing, I'm not sure when you're going to have your guaranteed maximum price contract tied down, but what this gives us is the decision we need to get ready to sell this debt. So I'm not clear that we'd actually sell the debt before you knew what your guaranteed maximum contract price would be. But in the event that the bonds were issued and it was the full 30 and you only needed 29 million, then you, the board, would decide what to do with the additional proceeds.
Thank you.
Mr. Cates?
Along that lines with when the debt is issued, if I remember from the bond resolution, there is the ability, and we may have expenses associated with elementary 13 before the debt is issued.
Right.
But the bond resolution allows us the option to pay,
Correct.
basically pay the district back.
To reimburse, correct.
Reimburse.
The resolution y'all adopted in December, I think it was, has reimbursement language so that any expenses from actually 60 days before you adopted the resolution forward, any of those expenses can be repaid from the proceeds of the bonds.
Thank you.
And I'm going to weigh on to the question that Mr. White asked. I personally prefer the lower term years payback. The 5-year plan to me seems to fit probably a more palatable to our taxpayers, but certainly I love to save money. If you can pay it off, just like your home mortgage, if you can pay it off early, you save that money. But I do know, I know that the change in millage on the 5 years, 54.8 to the 67.5. Somebody refresh me again, where would our millage go on the 3-year? Mr. Gallagher, I think you had that, and it's probably in my
You would go to
notes.
75.4, it'd be a 20.6 mil increase.
20.6 mil increase. And we got all the chart on what that means, but that was my I guess my little more conservative approach to it, the 5-year, but I certainly like the idea of saving money on the front end, but I'm sure that it will be, to some folks, a burden to do it in a 3-year cycle, but it does save a lot of money. Mr. Cates, you have anything you want to add there?
No, sir.
Yeah, do you have a view, Mike, 3 or 5?
Well, I tend to lean more towards the shorter term as a result of the amount of capital debt that comes back and the saving the interest, but I also understand the difference in the burden between 3 and 5 for the taxpayer. So,
Can I ask another question? So, Ms. Heiser, just to clarify, if we did have proceeds left after the guaranteed maximum price is established, because they're non-callable, we couldn't use those proceeds to
No.
pay back these. So we were basically going to spend it on something.
You could defease it, but I don't know economically if that would really help you. The interest rate on the existing debt would continue to accrue, so you can't prepay it in the sense of stopping the interest from accruing. You could maybe defease it, but that's where you would put your cash in an interest-bearing account and use it at the maturity to help pay. My honest belief would be that with y'all's capital needs, that you would find it more economically advantageous to use those proceeds to help with the project.
And when do we expect the price to be fixed? Do we know?
That's
Richardson, anything?
It's probably going to be about the same time as we're selling this debt. But I don't recall the schedule.
So is there any reason we can't seek to accomplish that we're getting a price prior to selling the debt, so we can hone in closely on exactly what we want to borrow?
Oh, absolutely. We can, unless y'all have cash flow needs that require the bonds to be issued very quickly, we can time the issuance of the debt so that the debt's not issued and not sized to its final number until you have your maximum price. So, yeah, we can make that work.
We'll need to do it for the levy though.
Oh, that's correct. Yeah, Mike pointed out, it's important that this debt be issued in time for the millage to be delivered, the necessity for the millage, the debt service payments have to be delivered to the auditors and treasurers of the 2 counties, and that's probably mid-September, early to mid-September at the latest.
So what's the process for getting the guaranteed maximum price? What's left to do there?
I think they're on the, what they call the DD pricing right now, so I think they've got one more step before we come back with a GMP, but I'm not sure, I just don't recall what the timing was when they were supposed to come back with that.
Mr. White, we could check on that process and have.
We can
report
press
back.
to try to bring it in
May I
before
speak to that?
September.
Yes.
I'm looking at the presentation that was given several months ago, the schematic design, and I'm looking at the chart for elementary school 13 projected schedule, and it shows, again, I'm scanning this in a hurry, that the final GMP would be in December. That design development we should be coming up within about 4 weeks on that, and then after that, we would begin the GMP process. But if they're still on the schedule that was proposed, what I'm looking at shows final GMP of December.
Any further discussion? Ms. Hammond?
No, I was just thinking, all of these questions are good. It'd be good to have those known, like that guaranteed price, before we even voting on this.
Mr. Gallagher, back to what you said, the key is the millage and the local auditor setting that millage for whatever bonds, and that's, you said September
Typically, they're going to do that during September. That way they have the tax bills out in
Right.
October.
Right. Okay, Ms. Hutchinson.
Well, I just did a little bit more calculating since we're looking at 3 and 5, and I like to break things down to the monthly, since we pay our bills monthly. And looking at using the assessed values that are in the chart, then for the occupied homes, the difference between the 3 and 5 year is $2.53. Looking at the motor vehicles, that's taxpayers would be paying $2.53 more per month based on the assessed, whatever their assessed values are. For motor vehicles, that's 76 cents. We're used to talking in millions. It's hard to talk in cents. And then for other business or personal property, we're looking at $3.80 per month extra for going to the 3 years. So, I know we all like to take a look and make sure we are paying attention to the taxpayers, and I think that looking at that, it's not a huge difference, and the total savings for the taxpayers is quite significant.
Mr. Cates.
It occurs to me that we have two outstanding experts in the room, and we have not asked you for any guidance or counsel. You've presented 3, 5, 7, and 10, and sounds like we're kind of balancing between 3 and 5. Can you give us any information that might be helpful as we look at this from a financial planning background and advice, things we might consider, pros and cons between the two?
I would say the big
Are you
key-
going to punt?
No, I'll take it. The difference between 3 and 5 years, obviously, interest rate savings, you've identified that key point. The other is looking at all of the needs of the district. Mr. Lovelace pointed out, you have much greater needs in this district beyond just this one facility. So a 3-year payback gives you the ability that you will have dollars if your new normal is going to be 75.4 mils, that's going to be your new target, then you will have additional dollars coming available after 3 years to fund those needs. The number for the annual maintenance, I remember years and years ago, that was about $12 million. Because of the drop in assessment, especially in the Richland County side of things, those numbers have been compressed to stay at or near the mill targets. And so, I would encourage you to, you can't go wrong either option, but 3 affords you more flexibility down the road.
Franny, you want to weigh in?
Yeah.
No, I think we just had to weigh, but
Yeah, well, I'm actually a taxpayer in the school district, and I support whatever y'all decide. And I'm a 6%er, so whatever y'all want to do. No, as Mike said, I think you're wrestling between two good options. I mean, you've made the decision to make the investment in the school, and now it's just a question of what y'all believe is the best way to repay that. And I think either option I would be comfortable with. As Mike said, being able to recapture your 8% as quickly as possible is always an advantage and gives you more flexibility.
And I'll just say from the board, I think initially and always we've been at the lower number of years of payback. Just trying to decide what our taxpayers can handle and feel comfortable with. They feel comfortable with the schools and the new school. So it is a tremendous savings to be able to do that. But it's a lot. It's a shorter term and it puts the capacity back. So there's a lot of pluses. Any other discussion? If not, Dr. Melton, do you have anything you want to? I'm sorry.
No,
If
sir,
not,
thank you.
what we've got right now is to vote on the amendment that Mr. Lovelace made. Mr. Lovelace's amendment was to change the term from 5 years to 3 years. And that has been seconded, and we have discussed it, so we're at the point of making a vote on it. So all those in favor of the amendment to the original motion made by Ms. Hutchinson, please raise your hand, and it'll be to have it a 3-year payback. All those opposed? And I think that amendment makes the first motion a moot point because yours was a 5-year. So,
Do you have to vote again to pass it?
yeah, and that becomes the original. But we'll vote on the original motion, which was to have a 5-year payback. And that's been seconded and discussed too. Is any further discussion on that motion?
But it's now
As
no.
amended.
As amended.
As
As
amended,
amended.
3 years.
Right. So we're voting on the original motion as amended. I'm sorry, thank you. And all those in favor of the original motion as amended, which the amendment's taken to 3 years, raise your hand. And all in favor? And all those opposed? So that motion passed 5-1. So thank you very much, Mr. Gallagher and Ms. Heiser.
Thank you.
And that brings us to item number 19, which is our second and final reading of proposed general fund budget for fiscal year 1920, shown in Exhibit B. Mr. Cates.
Mr. Chairman, I move we give second and final reading of proposed general fund budget for fiscal year 2019-2020 as presented in Exhibit B.
We have a second. Ms. Hammond seconds. And that opens for discussion. Mr. Richardson, anything you want to present to us? I know we were here for the public presentation, but feel free to present. This will be our second and final.
Didn't want to cooperate with me. I don't really have anything else to add, Mr. Gant, other than really this budget hasn't changed much. We've obviously been able to balance it, thankfully, without a millage increase, and also providing a 4% increase for all of our employees. I think we got some really good people in this district that have helped us save some money along the way. It's allowed us to redirect funding to these kind of things, and I think it's starting to show.
Right. Mr. Cates?
Mr. Richardson, because it was stated earlier tonight in public participation that our fund balance is $44 million, can you address what our fund balance is and what our policy requires?
Well, what our policy requires is us to have a fund balance, an unrestricted fund balance of 15 to 18% of our upcoming general fund budget. Currently, we're there. I'm not sure about the 44 million. I know we probably have general fund approximately $36.4 million, but we do have some of that that's been assigned. So we actually have a little, right at 32 and a half, and these are coming off the top of my head, I haven't looked, but it's roughly $32.5 million of unassigned fund balance, which does put us within our board policy.
And it's the unassigned
Is
that
what-
the policy addresses?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and throughout the year, I would expect that that fund balance ebbs and flows based on disbursements from the counties and from the state against our expenditures. Can you, again, ballpark, which for you probably means within $5 or $10, what the low is on our fund balance? What's the kind of annual historic low in that fund balance?
Well, I don't know about the annual historic. I haven't gone back and looked back in time, but I do know this past year we reached a low point of approximately $8 million towards, and I don't remember the exact dates, towards the end of November before our tax dollars started rolling in December.
So if we had reduced our fund balance by $8 million, then we would have had to look at alternative funding.
We would look at
For-
some type of tax anticipation note or juggling some of our expenditures.
Thank you.
Mr. Lovelace?
Mr. Richardson, do we plan, I mean, the fund balance you're talking about was the 2018 fund balance?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do we plan to add to that fund balance this year, or you don't know that until the end of the year, or how does that work?
It's a little early for me to, and I'll start trying to determine where we are. It's a little early yet for us to do that, but getting towards the end of June, we'll start getting a better picture of where we are. There's a lot that goes on after the close of the fiscal year when we have the auditors in here.
Right.
So we'll start having a pretty good idea towards the end of June.
Okay, so if we did have more than 15 to 18%, what would happen with that?
That would be up to the board.
Okay, so it'd be brought back to us to decide.
You would get that, you'd actually get that number when the audit is presented.
Okay. I have one more question I wanted. One of the public participation people brought up and added up the total expenditures and the total funds that came from both sources, which are state and I guess local. And there was a $700 and something thousand difference in that. Okay, the board, our policy is to balance the budget, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we wouldn't borrow more money than we actually needed. I mean, it's not borrowing. It's, we wouldn't ask the funders to give us more money than we actually required to balance the budget.
Not intentionally, no, sir.
Okay, was there any truth to that, what he showed?
Well, without having all the numbers here in front of me, I assume some of it has to do with the fact that we assign part of our fund balance to balance the 2019 budget, approximately $890,000, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
That's probably where that difference comes in.
Okay, so we're actually dipping into fund balance by some to do that?
We budgeted to do that. Whether or not we actually end up doing that, I do not know at this time.
Okay, so I guess that answers that. I just didn't understand, because when you add the numbers up, it is what he said, but I just sat here and did that. But okay, so maybe the fund balance, if we have some left over from this year, it'll go toward the $890,000 that we're using up to establish our next year's budget.
Well, not exactly. We used the $890,000 to balance our budget this year, knowing that if we exceeded the our revenue, that we could dip into the fund balance by that much in order to get through the year.
So we're hoping this $890,000 this year to put it back in there is what I'm getting at.
Oh, yes, sir. I hope we don't have to dip into it.
Okay, all right, that's good.
Mr. Richardson, when we talk about fund balance and the 15 to 18%, is that a guideline, a law? What is that?
It's actually our board policy.
Board policy. And is there a state agency or a law that says how much fund balance ought to be, or is it all scattered all over the board, depending on where you are?
Well, the State Department of Education has actually started watching that in the school district. They put them on fiscal watch if their fund balance is sufficient. And I don't recall what I think they recommend a certain number of days operating rather than a % of their budget, which equates to about the same thing.
Okay. And I wish that Ms. Heiser was still here, but when we're in a position that we're getting ready to be in to borrow up to $30 million, having a substantial, at least 18% or better fund balance, what does that do to our credit rating, or how does that help us? Is it a plus or a minus when we go borrow money?
Oh, it's definitely a plus. I mean, we have a very high credit rating, so that would not harm it at all.
Right. So it's just like if I buy a car at a dealership and my credit rate is really good, I'm probably going to either finance it at a low rate, get a good price, as opposed to having to go down to the same dealership with no credit or bad credit. Things change.
Absolutely.
So that's always been one of the big hinges for me to have a good fund balance, is how our borrowing, and we know we're headed toward, we had a facility study that tells us we're probably going to have to go out for a bond at some point in the future. So, well, thank you I didn't know exactly what the parameters were. Mr. Cates.
I may have created a little bit of confusion here, and I just want to see if we need to clear this up. When I made the motion, I did not stipulate the total amount of the budget, and I didn't know, Mr. Richardson, if you needed that. The motion was to give second and final reading of the proposed general fund budget for fiscal year 2019 and 2020.
I think traditionally we have thrown in the amount.
Without objection, I'd like to add that equates to $195,794,553.
Thank you.
Everyone okay with accepting a friendly amendment to the motion? Thank you, Mr. Cates. That was a little bit of the confusion going up here. Thank you, Ms. Towers. Ms. Hammond.
I'd like to just ask Dr. Melton this. I know this isn't in the budget, but I'd like to address Mr. Lazan's question or concern and about our monitors we used to have in elementary schools. Dr. Melton, do we, and I know that, I'd just like to say, since we're discussing the budget, that really would be something I'd love to see your staff look at, and maybe look at other schools if they still have monitors. I know they did when our kids were little, and it may be a place that we've saved, or maybe we do have them in some schools. We have them in none.
We do not, no, ma'am.
And that would really just be a support staff position.
Yes, ma'am.
I would love for the board to maybe look at that, or at least say that's something that we would like to explore for the next year's budget. And I just thought this might be a time to say that. But I truly think, rather than just salary, there's so many things that teachers have a need for that would not be a huge amount added to a budget, but would be so helpful, even if a couple of elementary teachers shared a monitor. But there are so many things they do that it takes more hands with little kids. So I just wanted to address that. I know that it'd be a good time to just share that with the board, that from
And
a
Ms.
teacher's point of view.
Ms. Hammond, I'll go on record with you to say, Dr. Melton, if you could explore that for a future year.
I'd appreciate it.
One of the things that I did see with the May 1st rally at State House is that a lot of elementary teachers, or even middle school or intermediate, one of the things they cited was no time to go to the bathroom. So
Or
if we could
lunch.
explore that, I'd love to see. I don't think there was a lot of cost, but I know there were some different little little employment pieces and all, but I'd love to see that explored as possible. Ms. Hutchison.
This question might be for Dr. Melton or Mr. Giuliano, but I'm looking at the budget, and in several areas, and I know one of the things that we're most proud of, and I think which helps add to our success, other than the class size and our wonderful faculty and staff, is our programming and the way we have so many programs to meet the needs of different groups of children. And I notice in our budget that in some of the categories, we actually have gone down in the amount budgeted for this upcoming year. And I'll point to, for instance, page 3 of the 17 pages, and that's under just the budget tab in your green book. I think Mr. Richardson has that, so. And I'm going to show it to Dr. Melton, too. I'll give you a chance to get to page 3.
These are special services funds, Mr. Richardson. I'm assuming these may be some cost contributing things with IDEA. Do you recognize right off where this is coming from the 123 and 24 and 25, 26 counts?
Well, all I can tell you is that a lot of these budgets are budgeted based on the student population. Teacher salaries are moving all over the place based on the student populations. So I can't tell you for sure that we actually reducing costs. We may be in a particular area like hearing that you see on this page. But overall, I don't think you see that. We've just probably reclassified these teachers based on their students in their class that they're serving.
And I'd add, Ms. Richardson, with some of these handicaps, such as hearing impaired and visually handicapped, sometimes we do contracted services, which you see, and I'll use line 59 as an example for visually handicapped, 0 across there. There are times when we need to contract specialists to come in because we may not have the staff that we need. So Dr. Slatton and Mr. Giuliano are looking for those kind of contracted services that we could use. So hearing handicapped, of course, would be one category that'd be responsive to the number of students that we're serving, which of course is going to ebb and flow on those. Speech is always one that is very large groups in numbers. In fact, the caseloads for our speech teachers are higher than we would like, but within state averages. So that's one area that we continue to struggle to try to monitor our numbers. And I've actually looked to see if we could provide contractual services there as well. And then the 123, the orthopedically handicapped, that too is dependent on the number of students that we're serving. So depending on the age of the child and the services that they receive, that's going to change over time.
Thank you. I was wondering if that was the case, is that it was money that had been moved around due to the need. While we're on that, page 6, line 132, which is advanced placement, and then down to line 139, International Baccalaureate, I see we have a decrease in the amount that's needed for next year, and I was just wondering if there's a explanation for that.
I was hoping you wouldn't catch that. Actually, I did check on that. Unfortunately, that is a teacher that's classified as a high school teacher and currently budgeted in 114 rather than showing up as IB. The teacher's in the budget, we just don't have it in the right location, the right.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand you completely.
Sorry.
The teachers miscoded.
Okay, okay.
The teacher's in the budget as a high school teacher, not an IB teacher.
Okay, okay, okay. So, so we're not decreasing the funding?
No, we're not.
Okay,
We're not.
good,
And we're not decreasing the program at all.
Okay, that's a relief. So, and I was wondering about that also because during the budget discussions, when the General Assembly was when they were going back and forth, and there was a lot of talk, not here, but maybe just through news reports, et cetera, I heard someone say that money was removed maybe from one area in the state budget, money that we got, and taken from another area of money that we would get from the state. So therefore, we had to actually make up that. And I was just wondering, a lot of things fall out in the final discussions. Can you tell me if that actually happened, if we're having to make up money because it was moved around?
It happens on an annual basis. I call it a shell game. I'm a little bit more blunt than you are.
Right.
But this year, not quite as much of that happened, although we did lose our money we traditionally get for technology, somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000+ that we've lost. That was redirected in the state budget, and that's the reason why we're not receiving that. So although it didn't impact this budget directly, it has impacted it indirectly.
Right. I think it is important to just remember, or to be stated, that we are giving all of our staff the same raises that we're giving our faculty, and we feel very strongly that needs to be done. And so that's local money that we're using.
Well, I would like to add, because a lot of people get confused when we say all employees, but I want to make sure everybody understands that's teachers, that's aides, that's secretaries, that's custodians, that's bus drivers, that's food service workers. That is everybody in this district.
Right. But the extra money that we got for that 4% raise was really just for teachers.
Just for teachers.
And so the school districts that chose to support everybody and give those raises, the same raise the teachers got, that's coming from our budget.
That is coming from us.
And same with the fringe benefits.
That's correct.
Fringe benefits for teachers and fringe benefits for our staff.
Correct.
Okay, just think that's important to say.
Any other discussion, question? Seeing none, we have a motion that's been amended to reflect the projected budget of $195,794,553. Made by Mr. Cates, seconded by Ms. Hammond. And discuss. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes unanimously. Thank you very much for great discussion. And that takes us to item number 20, which is second and final reading of proposed revisions to board policy IHAE, physical education. Have a motion. Mr. Cates.
Without objection, I'd like to go ahead and make the motion that we give item 20 and 21. Obviously, if there's a question, they would be pulled out. But I would move that we give second and final reading of second and final reading of proposed revisions to board policy IHAE, physical education, Exhibit C, and IKF, graduation requirements, Exhibit D.
Okay, is there, everybody okay with that? No objection? Okay. Ms.
Second.
Hutchison, seconds. Any discussion? Either one of these? Seeing none, all those in favor of giving a second and final reading to items 20 and 21, please raise your hand. That passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Cates. And that takes us to item number 22, which is first, excuse me,
No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
okay. 22, first reading proposed revisions, board policy JHCB, release time for religious instruction shown in Exhibit E. Do I have a motion? Ms. Hutchison.
I move that we give first reading approval of proposed revisions to Board Policy JHCB, release time for religious instruction as shown in Exhibit E.
Have a second. Mr. Cates seconds. Now, discussion. Ms. Hutchison. Anyone have discussion? Ms. Hammond?
Just general, this is pretty much, if I've read it right, pretty much, there's no big changes. Where, or is it? You tell me real quickly.
There are no significant changes,
Right.
major changes. The only thing that I would highlight are maybe twofold. One is that we specify in this particular policy that is specific to grades 6 through 12, students grades 6 through 12. And the other thing that I would highlight is that, of course, up to 2 credits for high school students can be awarded. And if a high school student transfers into District 5 from an approved private school, then they can also bring credits that we may accept. Those are really the major changes to this particular policy.
With you.
Any other question, discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of first reading of proposed revision to board policy JHCB, release time for religious instruction, raise your hand. Y'all ahead of me. The hour's late, isn't it? That brings us to item number 23, which is first reading of proposed revisions, board policy EBCB, safety drills, shown in Exhibit F. Mr. Cates.
Mr. Chair, I move we give first reading of proposed revisions to board policy EBCB, safety drills, Exhibit F.
Have a second. Mr. Lovelace seconds. Now discussion. Does anybody, I'm just going to ask our staff if anybody had, are going to do it.
Sorry.
On first reading on the safety drills, anybody want to?
Certainly. The major changes here is that it again reiterates monthly fire drills and specific to guidelines provided by Department of Education and State Fire Marshal. I think the newest item is the active shooter intruder drills that we hear so much about, and several districts, but namely this district, we are very active in pursuing and making certain that all of our staff and students are trained. This policy advises that we have at least a minimum of 2 active shooter intruder drills per year, 1 each semester. And of course, that is under the guidance of the Department of Ed and SLED, South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. And those trainings are under the umbrella and guides of an approved training mechanism that we do have in place and that we utilize during our training that our safety officers provide. Again, this is at least twice a year, and we ensure that all of our staff and students are receiving these trainings.
Mr. Lovelace and Mr. White.
I know you're not in control of this, but just a question, is there advance notice that that's going to happen, that we're going to have a training drill like that so that people don't, think it's the real thing and, you see what I'm saying? I mean, I just wanted to know, does SLED require an advance notice so that we don't have something like that and people think it's the real thing?
The trainers basically, they advise in the guidelines that they provided to SLED that we at least make sure that all of our staff and students are aware of what they are to do if and when there's an active shooter or there's an intruder on campus. So our trainings simply reflect that. So the advance notice, I don't know if I'm answering your question specifically.
Well, I was just saying, that's not fire drills are like a surprise thing. They just happen and people, do, file out and they do but in this situation, that could, if you had a surprise situation, that could really wreak havoc. I mean, somebody might have a heart attack or something. Just what I'm saying is I just wondered whether or not this is, it's a planned thing that everybody knows is going to happen, or it's a,
Advance notice is given to our schools. Again, as I stated, our safety officers who cover our geographical areas give advance notice to schools that, and they actually schedule that with them. So yes, advance notice is provided. So schools are aware that training on whatever particular day is going to be held and conducted. And so that's,
okay.
I hope I'm answering that
Yeah,
question.
you did.
Yeah, we won't come in with a surprise, as you're saying. No, we won't come in with a surprise, because you're right, a lot of things can happen, but we do want to make certain that our staff and students are, at least have some idea as to what they can and should do in the event that an intruder or someone is on campus.
Mr. White?
I'm just curious, I'm assuming we've not had any of these drills yet. This coming, it's all new.
We have practiced some of this, yes.
You have practiced them?
Yes.
And so what's the reaction? It seems like this would be very traumatic to some of the students. I mean, I know it's necessary in the world we live in, but it just, reminds me of hearing about grandparents used to have bomb drills and things and sirens going off, but it just seems like for young kids, going through the drill of a shooter's in the building, is that creating any collateral problems?
One of the things that the I Love You Guys Foundation advises is very simple. And Kate, to make sure that I get this right now, is fight, what is it, fight?
It's avoid,
Avoid,
deny,
yeah.
defend. Basically, we teach them to avoid, deny, defend. We teach the teachers, we teach the staff. The children are taught a little bit differently,
Right.
depending on the age group. So for elementary, we really train the teachers on how to get them in an area, try to keep
Secure
them as
area.
quiet as they can. And can it be traumatic on them? It can, but we never say anything without saying the high school level or the middle school level, this is a drill. This is a drill. We're gonna run a drill. So that they know if they ever hear it, and that doesn't come in front of them, it's not a drill.
That's right.
But they have to train on how to lock down and where to go, and they have to be given options, and that's what we try to do for them. So we've been doing this for as long as I was an SRO at Chapin High School. We ran them all the time. Lock out and lock down. For the elementary, it's a little bit different, and, we haven't had a situation yet where we've had a child absolutely freak out, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
We have not.
It could happen.
We try to do it a little bit easier.
That's what I
But
was
we've taken a lot of those lessons from places like Sandy Hook, where it really
Right.
happened, and what the teachers did in that situation to kind of help the kids. So this is a national program, everybody runs on the same sheet of music. Does that answer your question?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
So all of that's covered in that foundation I made mention of, the I Love You Foundation, as that training guides.
And just so everybody knows, that's Officer Cato. He heads up our safety and security program, right, Officer Cato?
Got the Chapin cluster, yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your input. That was very structured, very good,
It was good.
and we appreciate it. Ms. Hammond?
I would say too, just to thank again teachers and the principals. I know in my school, and I'm sure District 5 does it, but I'd like to ask, we've had the training, in an in-service, so teachers know exactly what to do with the kids. We've seen the film, whether you're middle, high school, or elementary. I would say there are some principals, not in our district, but where I teach, that have actually said sometimes it might be best not to tell the kids, just to see that they really would act the way they should do. And I hate to tell you all this, but middle schoolers, rather than high school or elementary, they know it's like you said, they know we're gonna have one. So, you have the blackened thing, your door has to be locked. We have to have our doors locked at all times at my school. If the principal comes by and can get in, he's gonna get on you, because it's supposed to be locked. And only, he could get in. But teachers are well-trained, I think is what I want to say to the public and the board. And I know District 5 does the same thing. So I was just going to say, as a teacher, I know, but middle school kids, and it really frightens me sometimes, if it would be the real thing. It's a real joke, because they're to get away and hide and get where they're not near a window or whatever. And, of course, they're like 13, 12 and 13, so they're laughing at it. And it really does concern me that sometimes we should, let them know, see how they would act if they really thought it was real. But I agree with the other side. It could be like, believing it and somebody literally be traumatized. So, but I do, I'm just glad we're on top of it, and I do love the training. I mean, and that young man that was killed at the last shooting that was somewhere, he did the engage. When nothing else can work, that's what you're told to do, stop the shooter. And that's frightening. But I mean, get on that. But we do good. Teachers and principals really train their schools.
Dr. Harris, I just wanted to add, and Officer Cato, you really gave us a good background of that. When we see things on a national news, sometime we see where things are kind of overplayed and overreacted. But it sounds like we've got input with SLED or whoever's going to help us with that. So I'd encourage you to keep that communication open, because I've seen some things on, and we all have, on national TV where not only students but teachers just traumatized by the whole process, and it got pretty physical and it got pretty real. And so I'd encourage you to keep, we want it to be as real as possible without traumatizing our faculty and staff and our students and our parents, because they don't want Johnny and Susie coming home traumatized from being safe at school. So
That's right.
thank you for that. Any other discussion at this point? Well, we've had a motion and a second on this first reading, and I'd ask all those who are in favor, raise their hand. And that passes unanimously. And before we go to our item 24, Ashland, would you introduce your student that's helping you tonight and helping us film? I've inadvertently forgot to recognize him.
Yes, this is Harry Driggers. He's a senior here at Spring Hill. He's also one of my media technology pre-interns. And this is the last thing he's doing.
Wow. Well, I think he gets an A for this last thing. And Harry, thank you for being here. Ms. Goggins, would you give Harry, or Mr. Cates, would you give Harry one of our, and I am so sorry I forgot that, but Ashland, please relay to your students how much we appreciate this service they provide for the district, and all the folks that are interested and want to go back and review these processes. It's really great. Thank you. So that brings us to item number 24. Ms. Hutchison.
I move that we adjourn.
Can we have a second? Mr. White, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. That passes unanimously, and I'll remind you, our next regular meeting will be June the 10th at the center next door. We'll look forward to all of you being here. Thank you so much.